Picture a clean white bar of soap, the kind you use without thinking, the kind that sits in its little dish next to your sink and asks nothing of you except that you pick it up, rub it between your palms and put it back down. Now fill that image with the reality of where it came from, a shed so hot in summer that the walls seem to breathe. The smell, and I mean a smell that has texture, that has weight, that coats the inside of your nose and stays there for 3 days, of boiling animal fat. Old fat. The kind that's been scraped from the inside of a butcher's barrel, hauled across a city in a leaking wooden bucket, and left to go slightly sour before anyone gets round to using it. Mix that with the sharp chemical burn of wood ash lye. A liquid so caustic it will strip the skin from your fingers if you forget yourself for half a second. Add the smoke. Add the constant damp. Add the sound of something enormous and thick and viscous being stirred with a wooden paddle the size of a small oar, hour after hour, arms screaming, back bent, sweat dropping from your chin straight into the pot. That's soap making in 18th century England. That's the industry that kept the world clean. Done mostly by women. Paid almost nothing. Noticed by nobody. We're going back there tonight. Not as tourists holding our noses and peering in from the doorway. We're living it. One season, one girl, one copper cauldron at the centre of everything. Everything she would have touched, smelled, tasted by accident, feared, and somehow survived. So, I make these history stories, and I genuinely have no idea if you're actually drifting off to sleep, or if you're just someone who finds the image of 18th century women boiling pig fat at 4 a.m. inexplicably relaxing. Either way, subscribe if you want, find a comfortable position, get your blanket sorted. Here we go. Before we get into the daily routine of it, and there is a routine, there is always a routine. That's one of the things I need you to understand about this kind of work. I want you to sit with one fact for a moment. In 1750s England, soap was taxed, not lightly, not as an afterthought. The British government taxed soap at a rate that made it genuinely expensive. Luxury level expensive sometimes. The tax had been around since 1712, and it would stay on the books until 1853. Over 140 years of taxing cleanliness, of treating a bar of soap the way we might treat, I don't know, imported wine or fine tobacco. The official inspectors, they were called excise men, had the legal right to enter a soap maker's premises at any hour, day or night. They could inspect the vats, they could measure the output. They could haul you in front of a magistrate if they thought you were underreporting your production. Small soap makers, the unofficial ones, the women who boiled lye in back alleys and sold their product door to door, they lived under constant threat. Not just the threat of injury, though that was real enough, the threat of the law. So when I say this work was dangerous, I mean it in more than one direction. Keep that in your head. We'll come back to it. Your eyes open to nothing. Not near darkness. Not the dim grey before sunrise. Nothing. The room you sleep in has no window. Or rather, it has a wooden shutter over something that was once a window. And that shutter is held closed by a rusted iron peg. And it has not been opened since November, because opening it would let in the cold that already owns every other corner of this city. For a moment, half a breath, maybe less, you don't know where you are. Then the smell finds you. It always finds you first. Before your body remembers the ache in your shoulders, before your mind assembles the list of everything that needs doing today, before any of that, the smell reaches through the dark and taps you on the chest like a finger. ash, old ash, the kind that's been wet and dried and wet again, with that particular mineral sharpness underneath it, like rocks in rain, fat, rendered and rancid at the edges, with that low yellow note that sits at the back of your throat. Lye water, which has its own smell that's hard to describe, almost clean, almost burning, almost nothing. A smell that makes your sinuses tighten and your eyes water slightly even when the actual liquid is yards away. And underneath all of it, the bass note that never leaves: smoke. Not the cheerful smoke of a fireplace or a candle. The working smoke of a furnace that's been running for months without stopping, that has soaked into the wood of the walls, into the fabric of your clothing, into your hair, into the skin of your hands so deeply that you could scrub for an hour and still smell it. You smell like a candle maker's nightmare. You smell like the thing that makes clean things clean. Welcome to Bristol, sometime in the autumn of 1751. You're 14 years old, you've been here for 1 year and 2 months, and this is the third time this week. You've woken before the church bells because your body has learned the schedule better than any clock. You're lying on a straw pallet against the wall of the back room, which is also the storeroom, which is also where the finish bars of soap are stacked on wooden shelves to cure, which means you sleep surrounded by your own work. Rows of them above your head. Pale yellow-brown bars, slightly greasy to the touch, smelling faintly of everything that went into them and nothing of what they will eventually become. Your name is Agnes Hartley. You're from a village called Compton Basset in Wiltshire, which is about 25 miles east of here, and might as well be on the moon for all the use it does you now. Your mother sent you to Bristol with a letter she'd paid the schoolmaster to write on her behalf, addressed to a woman named Mercy Cole, who is described in the letter as a respectable widow of good character, conducting a lawful trade. The lawful trade is soap. Mercy Cole has been making soap in this yard off Redcliffe Street for 11 years. She's 53 years old, she has forearms like a rope maker, and she runs the operation with the kind of absolute precision that comes from understanding that any mistake in this work is not just a mistake. It's a burn, it's a fire, it's a visit from the excise man, it's ruin. She has 2 girls working under her, you, and a 12-year-old from Gloucester named Bet, who is theoretically responsible for the ash heap and practically responsible for anything that nobody else wants to do. And then there's old Thomas, who is not actually that old. He's maybe 45, but he looks 60 because the lye has done something unspecified to his skin, and he coughs in a way that makes you feel guilty for being young and healthy. Thomas is the one who lifts the heavy things and stirs the big vat and doesn't talk much except to say careful at moments when you're about to not be careful enough. That's the whole operation. 4 people, a furnace, 2 copper cauldrons, a yard full of ash, and the smell. Always the smell. You get up before the bells. This is not virtue. This is self-preservation. Mercy Cole's morning begins at approximately 4:30, which means she is moving through the yard with a lantern by 4:45, which means anyone not already upright and in motion will feel the particular kind of attention that she pays to slowness and laziness, which is a long, quiet look that somehow communicates everything she thinks of you without requiring her to say a single word. You have been on the receiving end of that look 4 times since you arrived. You would prefer not to make it 5. The floor is cold under your bare feet. Genuinely cold. The kind that makes the bones of your feet ache before you've taken 3 steps. You find your shoes by feel. Leather so stiff with use and dampness that pulling them on requires both hands and a certain grim determination. Your stockings have a hole in the left heel that you keep meaning to mend and haven't. Your skirt is the heavy wool one, the practical one. Not because you're dressed for the cold, but because the lighter linen skirt got a splash of lye on it last week, and now has 3 holes in it of the non-intentional variety. You splash water on your face from the basin. The water is cold. Of course it's cold. Everything in this room is cold, including the soap bars on the shelves, which have a particular clammy quality in autumn that makes them feel almost alive when you stack them, like something that breathes slowly. The water has a slightly grey cast from the ash dust that lives in this room permanently, coating every surface, drifting down from the rafters in fine particles whenever the wind shifts. You're washing your face in ash water. This is normal. This is Tuesday. Through the thin wooden wall between the storeroom and the yard you can hear the furnace. This is the first thing you should understand about soap making. The fire never goes out. Not exactly. Mercy banks it down at night, reduces it to a smoulder, but she never lets it go cold. Because relighting a proper soap-making fire, getting the temperature right, getting the cauldron back to working heat, that takes time you don't have. That wastes fuel you can't afford. The furnace is a constant presence. Day and night it breathes. Day and night it demands to be fed. You can hear it now, even through the wall. A low sound, not quite crackling, more like a deep exhalation. Patient, waiting. You pull on your work cap, a linen thing that covers your hair completely, because getting lye in your hair is an experience you have had once and would strongly prefer not to repeat, and you open the door to the yard. The cold hits you like a door being slammed in your face. Bristol in autumn. The yard is cobbled, and the cobblestones are slick with a ground-level mist that has gathered overnight, thick and white and smelling of the river, which is close. Redcliffe Street is close to the Avon, and the Avon at this time of year has its own contribution to make to the general atmosphere of everywhere being damp and grey and slightly decomposing. But the furnace glows. Even from here, across the yard, you can see the orange light under the door of the soap house, and you can feel, not warmth exactly, not yet, you're too far away, but the promise of warmth. The knowledge that warmth exists and is accessible. That's enough to pull you across the yard at 4:30 in the morning when your feet hurt and your back already aches from a week of stirring, and you haven't had breakfast yet and won't for another hour. The furnace is the centre of this world. Everything orbits it. The door to the soap house is heavy and slightly warped, and you have to lift it slightly as you open it to stop it from scraping on the threshold. This is automatic now. You don't think about it. Your hands just do it. Inside, the heat wraps around you like a wet blanket. It's not a comfortable heat. It's not the heat of a bedroom fire or a kitchen hearth. It's the heat of something industrial, something that exists for a purpose that has nothing to do with human comfort. The furnace occupies the entire far wall, built into the stone with the copper cauldron, the big one, the main one, the one that holds about 40 gallons when it's full, set directly into the brickwork above it. The copper is dark with years of use. Not tarnished exactly. It gets cleaned periodically, more for functional reasons than aesthetic ones, but seasoned, imprinted with every batch that's ever been boiled in it. The inside edge has a residue that never quite comes off, a thin line at various heights showing where the soap mix has been at its different stages, like tree rings, except the story they tell is not years but batches, seasons of boiling. Right now the cauldron holds the remnants of yesterday's batch. The soap has been ladled out and the cauldron is nominally empty, but nominally empty in soap terms means there's a skim of grey-white residue on the inside walls, a faint oiliness to the base, and the smell. The smell doesn't respect the fact that the actual soap is gone. The smell has taken up permanent residence. Mercy is already here. Of course she's already here. You sometimes wonder if she sleeps at all, or if she simply reduces herself to a minimum state, like the furnace, keeping just enough heat to restart easily when needed. She's standing at the work table, a massive thing, bleached pale with use, scored with knife marks and stained with every substance that's ever been processed in this room, looking at something in a clay pot. She doesn't look up when you come in. The lie, she says. Not a greeting, not a command exactly. Just information, the way you might say the sun is up or it's Tuesday. The lie needs attention. This is the piece of information most relevant to the next hour of your life. The lie is what makes soap possible, and the lie is what makes soap making dangerous. Lie is alkali. Caustic alkali specifically. Potassium hydroxide for the chemistry-minded, or sodium hydroxide depending on what ash you're using. You don't know those words. Nobody in this yard in 1751 knows those words. What you know is the practical reality, which is this. You take wood ash, you pile it in a wooden hopper, the leaching barrel, and you pour water over it slowly, letting it drip through, collecting at the bottom in a shallow trough. The liquid that drips out is lye water, and lye water, if you test it by putting your arm in up to the elbow, which you do not because you're not suicidal, would strip the skin off you in under a minute. What you do instead is the egg test. You take an egg, you float it in the lye water. If the egg sits too low, the lye is weak, and you need to run the water through the ash again, or add more ash, or wait longer. If the egg sits too high, the lye is too strong and will make brittle, crumbly soap that nobody wants to buy. You want the egg to float with exactly a thumbnail width visible above the surface. A thumbnail. That's the precision required. Not a measurement in inches. Not a reading on a gauge. The careful eye of someone who has done this 100 times and knows what a thumbnail looks like, versus a finger width, versus the whole egg peeking up above the waterline, which means you've overdone it, and you'll need to add more water and wait again. You've been doing this for a year and 2 months, and you still sometimes get it wrong. Mercy never gets it wrong. You take the clay pot from the work table. It's warm, not hot, but warmer than the air, because the lye water that went in last night came out of the leaching barrel, which sits close enough to the furnace to stay above freezing. The weight of it is familiar. About 3 pounds of liquid, heavy for its size, the clay smooth and slightly tacky against your palms. You carry it to the leaching barrel, which stands in the corner nearest the door because the leaching process needs to be accessible from outside. The ash comes in from the yard, and a good leaching barrel gets loaded and reloaded multiple times a day. You ladle out a small quantity into a separate cup. Porcelain cup, old and cracked, because it doesn't matter what it looks like. It matters that you can see the egg clearly in it. You take an egg from the basket on the shelf. You lower it into the lye water. It sits. You look at it. The light in here is the furnace glow and 2 tallow candles, not much else. And in this light, judging the exact height of an egg in a cup of caustic liquid requires a kind of focused attention that your brain, at 4:40 in the morning, doesn't especially want to give. but you give it anyway. Because you understand. You've understood since the first month. When Mercy showed you the scar on her right forearm, a smooth, shiny oval the size of an apple, and said nothing, just held it out for you to see and then went back to work. That understanding the lie is not optional. The egg floats, thumbnail up. Good. Today's lie is good. You allow yourself approximately half a second of satisfaction. Then you carry the pot back to Mercy, who doesn't say anything because the fact that you've done it correctly means there is nothing that needs saying. Bet arrives 20 minutes after you. Her excuse when Mercy looks at her is that she was banking the fire in the house, which is true and which Mercy knows is true and which saves Bet from the look. Bet is 12, which means she's been doing this for a few months, which means she's still in the stage where everything surprises her. Her face when something unexpected happens is genuinely spectacular. A sequence of emotions that passes across it like weather over a hillside, too fast to fully read. Right now her face is saying, "It is cold and dark and I would like to be somewhere else." This is a reasonable thing for her face to say. "Ash," says Mercy. Not a greeting for Betty either, just the next task. Bet takes the ash bucket from beside the door and goes back out into the cold. The ash heap is in the corner of the yard, and ash management is more complicated than it sounds. You need different kinds of ash. Hardwood ash, oak, ash tree, beech gives the strongest lie. Softwood ash, bracken ash, fern ash gives a softer lie that makes us different kind of soap, softer and better suited to certain uses. The ash from the furnace itself can be recycled, but it's already been through one leaching and has given up most of its alkali, so it needs to be supplemented with fresh ash. Fresh ash comes from the households of the surrounding streets, where it's the byproduct of every fireplace in every kitchen and parlour. Mercy has an arrangement with several households. She takes their ash, they pay a small amount, or sometimes she credits it against soap purchases. It's a closed economy in its way. The waste from keeping warm becomes the raw material for getting clean. You can hear Bet shoveling ash in the yard, the scrape and fall of it, the particular dry sound of ash moving in volume, the slight cough as she breathes some of it in. Ash lung, that's a real thing in this work. Long-term exposure to ash dust. Mercy has a cough that isn't quite like Thomas's lie cough. It's drier, lighter, like she's perpetually clearing her throat. And you try not to think about what it means. You try not to think about your own lungs either. The fat comes on Tuesdays and Fridays. This is not a schedule you chose. This is the schedule of the butchers on the far side of Bristol Bridge, who have an arrangement with Mercy that has been running since her husband was alive, and who will tell you exactly where to go if you try to change it. Today is Tuesday, which means at some point between now and mid-morning, you will be walking to the butcher's to collect the week's fat, hauling it back in buckets with a wooden yoke across your shoulders, and attempting to do this without spilling it, which you never quite manage. But that's later. Right now you need to start the batch that's been waiting since yesterday afternoon. Soap making is not a one-step process. It's not even a two-step process. It's a sequence. And each step in the sequence requires the previous step to be exactly right before you can move forward. And if something goes wrong at any point, you don't necessarily know immediately. Sometimes you don't know until 2 days later when the finished soap comes out wrong, and by then you've already used the materials and the time and the fuel. You've watched Mercy take a bar of bad soap in her hands and feel it and smell it and say, very quietly, the lie was off on Wednesday. with the same tone someone might use to say, "I think it might rain." Not angry, not even particularly disappointed. Just noting it, storing it, adding it to the enormous library of things that went wrong that constitutes professional knowledge in this trade. The batch in progress is tallow soap, hard soap, the kind that sells in bars to the households that can afford it, the kind that gets taxed, the kind that Mercy licenses properly, because she's seen what happens to the unlicensed ones. The tallow has been rendering since yesterday. Rendering? That's the process of purifying the raw animal fat, the stuff that comes from the butcher, the scraps and trimmings and the fat from around the kidneys and joints, all of it melted down in the small cauldron, the fat liquefying and rising to the top while the impurities, the bits of meat and blood and gristle, and things you prefer not to identify, sink to the bottom or get skimmed off the surface. The result, if you've done it correctly, is a pale yellow liquid with a particular translucency, a clean fat smell without the sourness of the raw material. If you've done it wrong, it's darker than it should be, cloudier, and it smells slightly off in a way that will translate directly into a slightly off soap. You look at the small cauldron. The tallow is pale, clearish at the top. Thomas did the initial skim yesterday before you started the storeroom work, and you can see where the surface is clean. Good. The tallow is good. Now here is the part that requires the most focus. The part that Mercy watches most carefully, even when she pretends she isn't watching. You combine the lye and the fat. The temperature matters. Both the lye water and the liquid tallow need to be at approximately the right temperature. Not the same temperature, but within a certain range of each other, and you judge this by feel, by the steam coming off each, by experience. Too cold and they won't saponify. They won't bond. They'll just sit in the cauldron as two separate hostile substances. Too hot and you'll get soap that's harsh and breaks apart. You begin to pour the sluice into the tallow, slowly. Not as a stream, but as a measured addition, a cup at a time, while stirring. The stirring is with the paddle. The paddle is a 6-foot wooden thing, smoothed by years of use, lighter at the handle end and heavier at the blade, and it takes a particular motion to use effectively. A figure of 8 through the cauldron, not just a circle, because you need to move the mixture from the centre to the edges and back again. You need to keep it all in motion. You need to prevent any part of it from sitting still long enough to stick to the bottom. Your arms know this motion. They've done it so many times that they do it while your mind is elsewhere, which is both an efficiency and a slight problem. Because elsewhere is sometimes so far away that you don't notice when the mixture starts to change. But your arms know. They feel the resistance change. The mixture going from a liquid state, thin, almost watery, the fat and lye sitting together but not yet committed, to something thicker, slower to move, the paddle pulling with more resistance. This is called trace. When you lift the paddle and let the mixture drip back into the cauldron, and it leaves a visible trail on the surface before sinking in, like a trail in sand before a wave wipes it. That's trace. That means saponification has begun. That means the fat and the alkali are reacting, bonding, becoming something neither of them was separately. Becoming soap. You will stir off and on for the next several hours. Your arms already hurt. This is Tuesday. I want to stop here for a moment and actually talk about the smell, because I've been gesturing at it since the beginning and I don't think I've done it justice. The soap house in full operation smells like nothing you've ever encountered in a domestic context. It doesn't smell like soap. not the finished product, not the clean, slightly floral or herbal smell that the final bars will have if Mercy adds anything to improve the scent, and often she doesn't because scent costs money. It smells like chemistry happening in real time. The fat component. Imagine the inside of a butcher's shop, but warmer, much warmer. The fat from the rendering cauldron has a heaviness, an animal quality that is not quite meat smell, but is somehow more primal than that. It's the smell of something useful being extracted from something dead. It has depth to it. It sits in the back of your throat. The ash component, dry and mineral, like the smell of the inside of a chimney, but also strangely alive, like something that used to be a tree is still trying to be a tree in its final particulate form. When you shovel fresh ash, there's a brief, sharp burning quality to it, not painful, but definitely present. The lye component. This is the hardest to describe. It's almost the absence of smell, a kind of chemical neutrality that your nose keeps trying to interpret as clean and failing. There's an edge to it, a slight bite that becomes unpleasant if the concentration is high enough. When the lye water and the fat first meet in the cauldron, there's a moment, just a moment, of something almost sulphurous, a sharp release that makes you want to step back. Then it settles. Add to all of this smoke from the furnace, which has been burning what's available in terms of fuel, which at this time of year includes wood with some moisture in it still, so the smoke is not clean but grey and slightly greasy. Coal sometimes when the budget runs to it, which gives the smoke that particular blackness that sits on the tongue. And then, your clothes have absorbed months of all of the above, the wool of your skirt, the linen of your cap and apron, the leather of your shoes. It's all impregnated with soap house. When you walk out into the street at the end of the day, people move slightly away from you. Not rudely, usually, not cruelly, just instinctively. You're a smell that precedes you by about 4 feet in all directions. You used to mind this. Now you barely notice. This is worth sitting with for a moment. In 1751, personal cleanliness, the kind that soap makes possible, is a function of wealth. The rich wash more. They have the soap, they have the water brought up by servants, they have the time. The poor wash when they can with what they can, which is sometimes just water and sometimes not even that. The woman making the soap that keeps the wealthy clean cannot afford to keep herself clean with it. The tax on soap means that even the people who make it buy it sparingly. Mercy uses the imperfect batches, the ones that are slightly off, slightly harsh, the ones that wouldn't sell at full price, for household use. The good stuff goes to market. The good stuff goes to the houses on the merchant streets, to the servants of the great households who've been sent out with a list of what to buy. The irony of this sits on you differently depending on the day. Most days it just sits there, flat and quiet like the ash in the leaching barrel, part of the landscape of the work. But some days, the days when you're tired, when the lye has splashed somewhere it shouldn't have, when the batch isn't setting right and you don't know why yet, some days the irony has an edge to it. You can feel it then, if you let yourself. By 8 o'clock, the bells of St. Mary Redcliffe marking it from 3 streets away, Thomas has taken over the stirring, and you are in the yard with the wooden yoke across your shoulders and 2 empty buckets hanging from the ends of it. The yoke is heavy, even empty. It's oak, seasoned and dark, with the sweat of the hundreds of trips it's made worked into the grain of it. It sits across the back of your neck and shoulders, and after 20 minutes you stop feeling it as an object and start feeling it as a pressure that's simply part of your body now. You're going to the butcher's, St Thomas Street, then across Bristol Bridge, if the bridge isn't too backed up, or through the back streets if it is. The butchers that supply Mersey are on the far side of the bridge, in the area near the city's main market, where the animal smell is different from the soap house animal smell, fresher, more immediate. Bristol, in 1751, is the second city of England, not second in size. That's Bristol and Norwich and York all arguing about it, but second in commercial importance, second in wealth, second in the particular confident swagger that comes from being a place that ships things around the world as profits from it. The city spreads across both banks of the Avon, connected by Bristol Bridge and a handful of smaller crossings. The harbour is never empty. The sound of the city on a clear morning includes the creak and knock of ships' rigging, the calls of watermen, the thud of cargo being loaded and unloaded at the quays. Ships leave Bristol for the West Indies and come back with sugar and tobacco. Ships leave for the American colonies and come back with timber and furs. Ships leave for Africa and come back with things that polite conversation doesn't quite name. You know this the way you know most things about the city, through its edges, through what it produces in your world. The tallow you collect today comes partly from cattle, whose hides went to the tanneries, and whose meat went elsewhere, and whose fat, the residue of everything else, came to the butcher and then to Mersey Cole's yard. Everything is connected. Everything is downstream of something else. You step out of the yard onto Redcliffe Street and join the city. The morning street is already in motion. Market women with baskets balanced on their heads, moving with a practised ease that looks effortless and is anything but. A coal cart blocking half the street while the coalman argues with someone in an upstairs window about the delivery. Children moving in and out of the crowd in ways that suggest they are either going to school or picking pockets. And honestly, in 1751 Bristol the two are not always easy to distinguish from each other. The ground is wet from last night's rain, and the cobblestones have collected the usual morning contributions. Water from chamber pots, vegetable peelings from kitchen preparation, the general discharge of a city that doesn't have a proper sewage system, and is reasonably philosophical about this fact. You walk along the edge, close to the buildings, because the centre of the street is where the carts go, and you'd rather not get splashed by wheel spray. The yoke limits your movement. You can't turn suddenly, can't dodge quickly, have to navigate the crowds with a certain deliberateness that makes you feel, on busy mornings, like a ship, large, slow to change direction, dependent on the other vessels getting out of the way. They mostly do. The yoke is recognisable enough. They know what it means, somebody collecting something heavy, making some run that needs to be made. You pass a woman selling hot pies from a tray. The smell of it reaches you through the soap house smell that you carry with you everywhere. A shock of hot pastry and meat. And your stomach makes a comment that you ignore because you've already had bread and there's work to do. Past the church of St Thomas, which catches the morning light on its tower and reflects it back at you in a way that seems disproportionately cheerful given the hour. The bridge. Bristol Bridge is older than everything around it. The current bridge was rebuilt in the mid-1600s after the previous one, which had houses on it, as many medieval bridges did, became structurally impossible to love. This version is solid stone, wide enough for two carts to pass, with the slight rise in the middle that makes the loaded yoke feel much heavier on the way up, and much less controllable on the way down. In the morning, the bridge is the bottleneck. Everyone who needs to go from one side to the other goes here, which means there are always carts trying to go in both directions simultaneously, and there are always pedestrians threading through the carts, and there are always at least two separate arguments in progress at any given moment about who has right of way, and the argument is always simultaneously about this specific situation, and about some much older grievance that the current situation is merely a new excuse to raise. You wait. A cart with a broken wheel is being examined by several men who are clearly disagreeing about the diagnosis. A pair of dogs are performing some kind of territorial negotiation in the middle of the road that neither they nor anyone else seems entirely committed to resolving. Below you, through the gaps in the stonework, the Avon, dark green-brown this morning, running high after the rain, moving faster than it looks like it's moving until you track something floating past. A plank, a tangle of rope, and then you understand the speed. The tidal reach of the river comes this far inland. The water rises and falls with the sea, which is miles away but makes its presence felt. Ships further downstream. You can see their masts above the roof lines. You stand on the bridge for 3 minutes, maybe 4, not because you've chosen to stop, but because the cart isn't moving and neither is anyone else. And in those minutes you watch the river and think about nothing specific, and your arms and shoulders have a brief grateful rest from the yoke. Then the cart moves, and you move. The butcher's quarter smells entirely different from the soap house, and entirely the same. Here the fat is fresh. Here the animal smell has not yet been processed into something useful. It's just raw, immediate. The smell of the city's meat supply coming in from the farms outside, being killed and butchered and cut and sorted in the cramped yards and buildings off the main market. The sound of it is something you've never fully got used to. The particular sounds of a working slaughterhouse, which are not the sounds of violence, not mostly, but are sounds of industry, of physical labour applied to large, heavy things, with undertones of organic process that your mind would rather not categorise too precisely. You find the entrance to Sawyer's yard. That's your butcher. John Sawyer, who has been supplying mercy for longer than you've been alive, who has the particular quality of a man whose professional courtesy is real but limited, who will give you exactly what's been agreed, and not one bit more and not one bit less. A boy meets you at the gate, not much younger than you, face and hands already past clean, already wearing the particular expression of someone who has seen too much of the inside of a slaughterhouse to be surprised by much. "Fat's ready," he says. "I can see it is," you say, because the buckets are already sitting there in the yard covered with a cloth, and the smell is already reaching you. "Heavy today," he says. "Good week for fat. Lucky me." He doesn't smile. This isn't especially a smiling kind of interaction. He unties the cloth from the first bucket while you position the yoke and hook the bucket to the left side. It's heavier than usual. He wasn't wrong. The tallow on the way back. This is the work as pure physics. The yoke, now loaded, pressing into the muscles of your neck and shoulders with a weight that is not quite pain yet, but is entirely aware of itself. The bucket swinging slightly with each step, which adds a rhythmic tug and pull to the load, which means your body is constantly making tiny adjustments to stay balanced. The bridge again. Now going uphill first, which means the weight seems to pull you backward, like a hand on your collar. A woman at the edge of the bridge watching you pass looks at your face and looks at the buckets and looks away. You don't blame her. By the time you're back at the yard gate, your hands are numb from gripping the yoke frame, and your shoulders feel like they've been inhabited by something large and ill-tempered, and your shoes are wet through from a puddle you misjudged at the corner of Temple Street. You unhook the buckets at the yard entrance. You shrug the yoke off your shoulders. The absence of the weight feels strange, too light, like something is missing. You stand there for a moment, rolling your neck slowly, feeling the complaints each vertebra makes as it moves. Thomas comes out of the soap house and takes the buckets without being asked. "Right weight," he says. "Heavy," you say. He nods. This is good news for the batch. He takes the buckets inside and you follow, because the batch is waiting and the batch doesn't care about your shoulders. I need to tell you about Mercy Cole's hands, not her personality, not her business acumen, not the precise history of how a butcher's wife became one of Bristol's more competent small-scale soap manufacturers after her husband died of fever in 1739. All of that is real and worth knowing, but it's not the thing that tells you most about what this work does to a person. Her hands do that. The right hand. The palm is notably tougher than ordinary skin. Not calloused the way a farmer's or a blacksmith's might be, not ridged and hard, but uniformly thickened, as if the skin has decided to add an extra layer as a precautionary measure. The colour is slightly different too, paler than her face, or rather differently pale, a kind that comes from years of mild chemical exposure rather than lack of sunlight. There are 3 scars on the right hand that you know of. 2 are faded, old, from early in her career probably. 1 is more recent, a year old maybe, on the web of skin between thumb and forefinger, smooth and pink and about the size of a large thumbnail. Lye splash. She showed it to you once. Not as a warning exactly, more as a matter of fact. This is what the work looks like. This is the text of the work written on the body. The left hand is slightly better. She uses the right to hold the measuring tools, the ladles, the cups near the cauldron. The left takes the cooler end of things. Her forearms are similarly marked. The scar you saw in your first month is on the right forearm. The big oval one. When she stirs the cauldron, she keeps her sleeves pushed back. Not rolled neatly, but pushed impatiently, because she's done this 10,000 times, and neatness stopped being relevant years ago. When she works, those hands move with a precision that has nothing to do with carefulness and everything to do with experience. She knows exactly how close she can get to the hot lye without risk. She knows the feel of the right temperature through the paddle handle, through the ladle, through the slight change in the steam that rises from the cauldron. She is not careless. She is precise in a way that looks careless to someone who doesn't know the difference. You have been trying to learn that precision for a year. You're not there yet. You know this because your hands still flinch sometimes when they shouldn't, because you still occasionally hesitate at the moment when hesitation costs you. Mercy's hands don't hesitate. You ask her once. This was in your 3rd month. A quiet evening when the batch was set and the work was done and you were both in the back room doing inventory. You ask her how long it takes, until it feels natural. She thinks about this for a moment. She's looking at a row of curing bars, not at you. The hands know before the head does, she says. You'll know it's happened when you stop thinking about the temperature. A pause. She moves a bar slightly on the shelf, examines it, puts it back. "My husband," she says, and then stops. She does that sometimes. Starts a sentence about him and decides not to finish it. "He said the work teaches you or kills you," she says eventually. and that the teaching takes about 3 years. 3 years, you say? You're in year 1. Stop worrying about how long it takes. She takes the lantern and goes upstairs. You sit in the dark for a moment with the rose of curing soap and the smell that never leaves, and you think about 3 years, and you think about her hands, and you think about what the work is teaching you, and whether you're capable of learning it. The next morning at the cauldron, you notice something. You didn't hesitate at the temperature check, your hands just did it. You file this way without telling anyone. The excise man comes on Thursday. His name is Mr. Portman. He is a small, precise man with a ledger under his arm and a face that has been designed, it seems, specifically to communicate official suspicion. He wears dark coat, clean, which in the soap house environment means he's not planning to touch anything if he can help it. He comes once a month, approximately. The visits are required by law. He measures the contents of the cauldrons, compares it to the previous visit's record, calculates what should have been produced and therefore what should have been taxed, and writes it all in the ledger with a small metal pen that he carries in a case inside his coat. Mercy Cole, when the excise man is in the yard, becomes a version of herself that you find slightly unsettling. Not because it's false, it's not false, it's just very careful. Her voice drops half a register, her manner slows down. She answers questions precisely, not fully, precisely. She shows him exactly what he asks to see. She doesn't offer additional information. She doesn't make jokes. She doesn't ask about his family or his mourning or anything that might constitute a conversation. She watches him the way the furnace watches the room. Alert, neutral, warm with potential. You and Bet are instructed on excise days to work quietly and not speak unless spoken to directly. Thomas disappears to the far end of the yard to do ashy management, which is a job that can be done indefinitely, and which conveniently puts significant distance between him and the official proceedings. Today you are stirring the new batch, tallow and lye in the cauldron, 40 minutes into saponification. The mixture thickening nicely, when you hear Mr. Portman's voice in the yard. The stirring does not stop. The batch doesn't care about the excise man, but you slow down slightly, involuntarily, at the sound of his voice, and then you make yourself speed back up, because a batch that doesn't get stirred properly is a batch that goes wrong, and a batch that goes wrong is money gone, and money gone is Mercy Cole's face, which you would prefer not to see. You stir, you listen. The last record shows 40 pounds of finished hard soap, Mr. Portman says. His voice has the quality of a man reading aloud from a document, which he probably is. Current stock as of this morning. 14 pounds here curing, Mercy's voice measured. 19 sold at market Wednesday. 2 pounds household use, as noted in the subsidiary record. A silence, the scratch of pen on paper. And the small cauldron, soft soap, current batch, quantity, 12 gallons approximately, as of this morning, ongoing. More scratching, you continue stirring. The paddle moves through the thickening mixture with a sound like the world's largest, slowest mixing bowl, the small metallic ring when the paddle catches the edge of the copper. Bet is in the corner, as quiet as it's possible for Bet to be, which is not entirely quiet, but quiet enough. The batch in progress, Mr. Portman says, and you can hear footsteps moving toward the soap house door. Mercy does not physically block the doorway. She steps aside, graciously, immediately, in a way that communicates both cooperation and a slight sense that this is a perfectly ordinary thing, and not at all something to which she's paying any particular attention. Mr. Portman steps into the soap house. He looks at the cauldron. He looks at you, briefly, in the way that officials look at workers in situations like this, registering your presence without quite acknowledging your personhood. He writes something down. You stir. The paddle goes through its figure of 8. The mixture traces behind it and fills in, traces and fills in. The heat from the furnace is considerable. A bead of sweat makes its way down the side of your face. Satisfactory, Mr. Portman says. He writes. He puts the pen back in the case. He closes the ledger. Until next month, Mrs. Cole. Good morning, Mr. Portman, says Mercy, and he's gone. The yard is quiet for a moment after the gate closes behind him. Then Mercy comes back into the soap house, picks up a ladle, dips it into the cauldron, examines the mixture, puts the ladle back. A little thick on the left side, she says. Keep the paddle moving. And that's that. But here's the thing about the excise system that I want you to understand. Mercy Cole is licensed. She does everything correctly. She keeps her records carefully and pays her tax on time and submits to Mr. Portman's monthly visits with a grace that she probably doesn't feel but performs impeccably. This costs her. Not just the tax money itself, though that's real and significant. The soap tax in 1751 amounts to a penny per pound of hard soap, which doesn't sound like much until you calculate it across a month's production. It costs her in time, in the attention she has to pay to record keeping, which is time spent not making soap, in the careful management of every transaction, every batch, every pound of ash and tallow. 2 streets from here, you know this because Thomas mentioned it once. In the absent way Thomas mentions things like he's speaking to himself and you're simply in the range of his voice. 2 streets from here, a woman named Peg Wallace makes soap in her kitchen without any license, sells it door to door, pays no tax, charges less than Mercy can afford to charge. Mercy knows this. Mr. Portman may or may not know this. The official position is that unlicensed soap making is illegal, and enforcement is attempted, and informers are paid a portion of the resulting fine. But Peg Wallace has been selling door to door for 3 years, and Mercy has been licensed for 11. You're not saying anything about fairness here. You're just noting that the people who follow the rules and the people who break the rules sometimes end up in approximately the same position, which is making soap in cramped, dangerous conditions for not much money, while the tax collector comes round monthly to check the accounts. The difference, Mercy told you once, is sleep. I sleep, she said. Whether Peg Wallace does is her business. Wednesday is market day. Not just any market. The Bristol market that matters for this trade is the broad, chaotic, magnificent disaster of St. James's Fair and the associated Wednesday market, where producers from the city and the surrounding countryside come to sell directly, where the hierarchy of commerce is temporarily flattened into a more democratic kind of chaos. You go with Mercy. Bet holds the yard. Thomas stays with the batch. The soap goes into a flat wooden cart. Not a heavy cart, just a 2-wheeled thing that Mercy pulls herself because she's pulled it every market day for 11 years, and hiring someone to do it would be an expense she considers unnecessary. You carry the sample basket. 6 bars of the hard soap wrapped in cloth, and a small clay pot of the soft soap, which you'll demonstrate on request by rubbing a small amount on your own hand and rinsing it off at the water barrel that the market committee keeps specifically for soap sellers' demonstrations. The market. Bristol Market, Wednesday autumn, is the smell of the whole city in concentration. The vegetable sellers at the southern edge, with the particular cold earth smell of turnips and beets and kale. The fish sellers in the middle, where the smell is oceanic and immediate and carries about 50 feet in any wind direction. The cloth sellers and rope sellers and the general merchandise stalls, the baked goods, the pies, the bread, the livestock, chickens in crates, occasionally a pig being walked on a rope, dogs everywhere. And here at the end of the eastern row, the soap and candle sellers. There are 4 of them today. Mercy and you, a large woman named Mrs. Haverstock, who makes tallow candles and also soap as a sideline, and who has very good teeth and a very loud voice. An old man who sells something that he claims is soap, but which has a quality to it that suggests improvisation. And a new seller, a young man you haven't seen before, well dressed for this context, selling soap bars that are white. White soap bars. This is notable. The hard soap you make is yellow-brown, the colour of the tallow and the lye combined, slightly waxy, not unattractive, but not white. White soap requires different ingredients, olive oil for the most refined varieties, or at least a cleaner fat. White soap is more expensive to make. White soap is the luxury end of the market. Mercy looks at the new seller for approximately half a second, and then sets up her own display with the calm efficiency of a woman who has been doing this longer than the young man with the white soap has been alive, and she does not look at him again. But you notice her pricing. She adjusts it, just slightly, just enough to make the comparison obvious. Her soap is good soap, competitively priced, from a known Bristol maker. His soap may be beautiful, but he's new, and new means unproven. The first customer comes, a woman in a decent coat with a market basket over her arm. She looks at the white soap. She looks at Mercy's soap. She picks up a bar from Mercy's display, turns it over, smells it. "Mrs. Cole," she says. "The same," says Mercy. "I'll take 3. The morning at the market teaches you things that the soap house doesn't. The soap house teaches you the work. The market teaches you the world the work exists in. You learn that customers who touch the soap before they buy it are more likely to buy. That the smell of the soap house that follows you everywhere is actually useful here. It's a certification of authenticity, an olfactory proof that you are who you claim to be. You learn that the price conversation is not really about price. The woman who haggles hardest is not necessarily the woman with the least money. Sometimes she's testing you, seeing if you know the value of what you're selling, seeing if you'll crumble. Mercy doesn't crumble. She has a price. She'll sometimes move a fraction on bulk orders, 4 bars for the price of 3.5, say. She'll throw in a small pot of the soft soap for a good regular customer, but she doesn't lower her price because someone asks her to lower it. "If I lower the price," she told you once, "they think the soap is worth less. Then they think about it and wonder why. Then they wonder what's wrong with it. What if they just want a bargain? Then they can go to the old man at the end and buy whatever it is he's calling soap. You watch the old man's stall today. Nobody bought anything from him. By midday the market crowd is at its heaviest, and you are standing behind the cart holding the sample basket and explaining, for the 14th time this morning, the difference between hard soap and soft soap and which one is better for which purpose. Hard soap, bars, for washing hands, washing face, scrubbing skin, lasts longer, travels better, can be cut to size. This is what you sell most of. Soft soap, paste or thick liquid depending on the batch. Better for laundry, better for large-scale scrubbing. Floors, stone, the heavy cloth of working clothes that needs the kind of treatment that would ruin something delicate. Ships use soft soap, hospitals, those that have them, workhouses. Which for wool? The woman in front of you asks. She is a cloth worker, you can tell from the state of her hands. Soft soap, smaller amount than you think you need, in cold water, you say. Hot water shrinks the wool, the soap's got nothing to do with it. She looks slightly surprised that you said something useful. And for children's skin. My youngest has a rash. This is a question that comes up enough that you have an answer. Less soap, not more. A small amount of the soft, well diluted. If the rash is from soap at all, it's from too much, not too little. But check with someone who knows medicine. She buys a pot of soft soap. Mercy, who has been selling a bolt-sized order to a draper's boy 3 feet away, catches your eye as the woman leaves. The nod, same meaning. You're learning. It happens on a Thursday in late October. Not early in the morning, not at the most dangerous part of the process. Not when you're testing the lye, not when you're combining hot fat and caustic liquid. It happens in the afternoon, when the batch is set and you're ladling finished soap from the cauldron into the settling frame. The settling frame is a wooden mould, lined with cloth, into which the liquid soap is poured and left to cool and harden overnight. The soap in the cauldron at ladling time is still hot, not boiling but close to it, a thick, slow-moving mass that pours in a way that's closer to sliding than flowing. You're doing this carefully. You've done this before. Your movements are practiced. You've been awake since 4:30. You've stirred for 3 hours this morning. You walked to the far side of the city and back with 40 pounds of fat on your shoulders. Your arms have been performing the same motion for so long that they've started to make it automatically, which means your mind has started to drift from the specific supervision of what your hands are doing. The ladle catches the rim of the settling frame. The angle is wrong. The soap doesn't pour where you aimed it. It goes across the top of your left hand. Hot liquid soap. Temperature still above 100 degrees. And, crucially, still chemically active. Still alkaline. Still lye-containing. The pain is immediate and specific and unlike anything else. Not just heat. You know the specific combination of burn and chemical reaction, and knowing what it is doesn't make it better. Knowing what it is just means you understand exactly why it hurts the way it hurts. You don't scream. This is partly because Mercy is in the room, and partly because it happens so fast that the first sensation is more shock than pain. You say, "Oh," in a voice that sounds surprisingly calm. Then you move to the water barrel. This is the most important part, the training. The thing you did automatically before your brain had finished processing the pain. You go to the water barrel, you put your hand in, you hold it there. Cold water, immediately, continuously. Don't take it out. Mercy is at your side within about 4 seconds. She looks at the hand under the water. She doesn't touch it yet. She looks at the settling frame, at the soap spill, at you. How long? Just now? Good. Keep it in. She goes to the shelf, takes down a cloth and waits. You keep your hand in the cold water. The pain is considerable, but has a quality to it. The kind that's worst in the first minutes, and then stabilizes into something you can manage. The cold water is doing its job. You focus on the sensation of cold, on the fact that you did the right thing, on keeping still. The burning part of the skin on the back of your left hand is about the size of your palm. Red when Mercy finally lifts it out to look. Angry. Not blistered yet, but going to be. She wraps it in the cloth. Not tight. Just covered. Finish the batch, she says. You look at her. One hand, she says. You can ladle with one hand. This is not cruelty. This is the logic of the soap house. The batch doesn't stop because someone got hurt. The batch has its own schedule, and if it cools in the cauldron without being properly poured, you lose the whole thing. You pick up the ladle with your right hand. You finish the batch. That evening, Mercy takes the cloth off and looks at the burn properly in the light of the lantern. Not deep, she says. Keep it clean. Change the cloth tomorrow. Will it scar? She looks at it for another moment. Probably a little. She wraps it again. She goes to the shelf and takes down a small pot. Dark clay, stop sealed with wax. Rendered tallow, she says. A little of this on the cloth. It'll help with the skin. You look at the pot. Tallow. The same ingredient you put in the soap. It heals, she says. Everything useful has more than one use. She hands you the pot and the lamp and goes upstairs. You sit with your wrapped hand and the pot of tallow and the rows of curing soap bars above your head. Your hand throbs. You catalogue the sensations, the specific ache under the wrap, the heat that keeps surprising you with its persistence, the way the fingers of your left hand feel simultaneously too large and too careful. You think about Mercy's scar, the oval on her right forearm. You understand something now that you understood before only in theory. The work teaches you or it kills you. Sometimes it teaches you by doing both things at once. Here is something worth knowing if you want to understand what's actually happening in this city and in this yard and in this hot, caustic, smell-saturated operation. Soap is not glamorous. Soap is, in the social hierarchy of goods, somewhere near the bottom of the list of things that wealthy people care about. Not because they don't use it. They do. Constantly, obsessively, especially in the period where cleanliness is starting to become associated with morality, where being a clean person is starting to mean being a good person, but because they don't think about where it comes from. The soap appears in the household. It is bought by the housekeeper or the kitchen maid. It sits in a dish. It gets used. It's replaced when necessary. The woman who made it is not part of this picture. She never appears in the picture. The merchant who sells imported fabrics gets his portrait painted. The apothecary who sells remedies of questionable efficacy has his sign above the door and his name in the city directory. The baker, even the baker, is known by the smell and the warmth of his shop, is a face in the neighbourhood. Mercy Cole's name appears in two places: the excise records, which no one reads for pleasure, and the small sign above her yard. Gate, which says Cole, soap boiler, licensed, in letters that have been weathering for 11 years. That's it. That's the entire public existence of the operation that produces a product every household in this city uses. This is not unusual. This is the rule for this kind of work. The industries that keep the world functional are also the ones that are least visible. The people who clean things, who make the things that clean things, are themselves considered unclean, considered part of the background, considered too close to the raw materials of the world, fat, ash, waste, residue, to be associated with a respectable transaction at the other end. You are a soap maker's apprentice. You smell like the soap house. You have a burn on your left hand and calluses on your palms, and a posture shaped by months of paddle work that means you stand slightly differently than you did when you arrived. You're 14 years old. In 10 years, if you're still in this trade, you will be invisible to most of the people whose hands you keep clean. This is not a complaint exactly. It's just a fact worth holding on to, because invisible doesn't mean unimportant. It means the opposite of that. Thomas doesn't talk much. You've established this. But on a slow afternoon in November, when the batch is curing, and there's nothing to do but wait and maintain the furnace, and watch the ash leach slowly through the barrel, Thomas sits on the bench outside the soap house door and drinks from a cup of small beer and, unprompted, begins to speak. You are sitting on the yard wall, wrapping your left hand, still healing. 3 weeks after the burn, a pink oval patch that catches your attention every time you look at it. Thomas says, "There was a fire here once, before you." You look up from your hand. 7 years ago, he says. Maybe 8. Autumn. He looks at the soap house door, the familiar heavy door, warped and resistant, that you lift and push every morning. Mercy'd left the furnace too hot. The batch got too hot. The lye crystallized on the side of the cauldron. That happens sometimes when it gets to a certain temperature, and then when it fell back into the liquid it went up. Went up, you say. Flared, not just smoke. The whole surface lit for a moment. Just a moment. He takes a drink. The soap took it. Soap doesn't burn easy, the finished soap, but the mix in progress, before saponification is complete, there's still active lye, still heat, and if it flares, he doesn't finish the sentence. Was anyone hurt? Thomas holds up his left hand. The small finger, you notice, doesn't straighten fully. The end of it bends at an odd angle. Caught the door frame going out fast, he says. Not the fire. He looks at it. Mercy was worse. Her arm. The scar. The oval on her right forearm. She stayed to close the furnace valve, he says. Stopped it from getting worse. By the time she came out, her sleeve was alight. You're quiet. She put it out herself, Thomas says, on the yard cobbles, rolled her arm on the cobbles. That's how you put out. I know, you say. He nods. He's not telling you this as instruction. He's telling you this as history, as the thing that made this place what it is now. After that, he says, she rebuilt the furnace design. The valve system is better. The distance between the flame and the cauldron is larger than it was. She rebuilt it herself? Hired a mason. But she designed it. He finishes his beer. He looks at the soap house. She's careful, he says. People who aren't careful don't stay in this trade. The ones who aren't careful burn the place down or burn themselves, and then there's no trade to be careful in. He stands up, creaks slightly in the way that suggests his back has its own opinions about November, and goes back inside. You stay on the wall. You look at your left hand. The pink patch of healing skin. You think about Mercy designing a better furnace after her arm was on fire. You think about what it means to know a thing so completely that even when it nearly kills you, your first response is to understand what went wrong and fix it. That's the work teaching you. That's 3 years maybe, and you're in year 1. You get off the wall and go back inside. The first time you make a delivery to one of the great households is in December. Mercy has a contract, not a formal document, but a standing arrangement, with the household of a merchant named Cartwright, who lives in a house on Queen Square. The Cartwrights have 8 servants, not counting the coachman, and a household requirement for soap that Mercy supplies quarterly. Quarterly delivery. This is different from the market. The market is public, democratic. Anyone with money can buy. Delivery to a great house is a different kind of transaction entirely, governed by its own rules of access and acknowledgement. You go with Thomas. He pulls the cart this time. It's the heavy cart loaded with a full quarter's supply, and you walk beside it carrying the ledger book in which Mercy has written out the account, the prices, the quantities. Queen Square is about 15 minutes' walk from the yard. It's a different Bristol from the one you work in. The square is large, actually square, with a garden in the centre that has trees and paths and a quality of maintained greenness that feels almost aggressive in a city of cobblestones and coal smoke. The houses around it are tall, elegant, their proportions deliberate, their stone facades clean in a way that suggests regular washing. Of course, regular washing. They buy soap for this. You find the entrance you're supposed to use, not the front door, not the main entrance with its fanlight and its brass knocker. The side entrance, down a narrow passage between the main house and the garden wall, where a door leads to the kitchen and storage areas. This is how deliveries work. The front entrance is for visitors and family. The side entrance is for suppliers, servants' business, the actual functioning of the house. You know this. You're not resentful of it exactly. It's just a rule. Like the lye concentration test is a rule. Like the paddle motion is a rule. The great house has its own physics, and the physics includes where soap makers stand. The woman who receives you is the housekeeper, a Mrs. Alcott, who is maybe 40 and has the particular quality of someone who has been managing large operations for a long time and has consequently become very good at assessing the competence of any one who appears in front of her within approximately 30 seconds. She looks at you and Thomas, and the cart and the ledger. "Mrs. Cole's people," she says. "Yes, ma'am." "Deliveries short last quarter. 3 bars hard soap." This is the first time you've done this delivery, and Thomas is looking at you sideways in a way that suggests he knows this has come up before and is curious how you'll handle it. You open the ledger. You find the last quarter's page. 24 bars hard soap, 12 pounds soft soap, 4 pounds mixed domestic, you read. Delivered October 3rd, receipt signed. I'm saying 3 bars were short. You look at the receipt. Mercy's handwriting, and beneath it a signature. Mrs. Alcott's signature, you assume, or whoever signed on her behalf. You look up. The receipt shows the delivery complete, you say. If there was a discrepancy, Mrs. Cole would want to know before today. A silence. Mrs. Alcott looks at you with the expression of a woman who is deciding something. She says. "Show me today's delivery." Thomas begins unloading the cart. Mrs. Alcott counts the bars. You call out the numbers from the ledger. They match. She signs the new receipt. "The short delivery," she says, as you put the ledger away, "was possibly a counting error on our end." "I'll tell Mrs. Cole you're satisfied with today's delivery," you say. "See that you do." She goes back inside. Thomas, who's been entirely silent throughout this exchange, picks up the empty cart handles and looks at you. "All right," he says. It is, you have learned, his highest form of approbation. You walk back through the side passage, out of Queen Square, back toward Redcliffe Street. The cold air after the kitchen warmth is a shock every time. Above you the sky is low and grey with December, threatening something. Rain or sleet, the particular Bristol winter sky that never quite commits. You roll your neck. Your back aches from the walk. Your left hand, in the cold, is tighter than usual where the burn healed. You are a soap maker's apprentice making deliveries to a great house through the side entrance in December. You're also, you realise, someone who just handled a difficult moment correctly without help, without preparation, without freezing. That's something. That might be more than something. December market, and it's cold enough that your breath makes small clouds as you set up the display, and the bars of soap have that particular winter coldness that makes them feel almost like stone. The market is smaller in December. Some of the outdoor sellers have retreated to wherever outdoor sellers go when the outdoor becomes untenable, but it's also more urgent. People buying for the household, stocking up for the Christmas period, for the winter, for the kind of settling in that cold weather forces. You're managing the display alone today. Mercy has gone to speak to a supplier at the far end of the market, someone about tallow prices, which have been rising since October, which is a problem she's been working around with increasing creativity. You have 6 bars of hard soap, the soft soap in 3 pots, and the sample basket with the demonstration cloth. The first hour is steady. Regular customers, quick transactions, the familiar rhythm of it. Then the woman in the blue coat. The coat is notable for this market. It's not extravagant, not the kind of thing you'd see in Queen Square, but it's well made and well kept, and it belongs to someone who has made choices about their appearance that go beyond pure practicality. She stops at your display. She picks up a bar of the hard soap. She turns it over. She smells it, which is something not everyone does, but which you've noticed tends to correlate with people who know something about what they're buying. "How much alkali?" she asks. You blink, not the usual question. The usual question is price, or what is it good for, or is this the same quality as last time? "From wood ash lye," you say, tested by float each batch. "What wood?" "Oak and ash tree primarily, some beech when it's available." She looks at you with an expression that recalibrates slightly. Adjusting, you realise her estimate of you. "You make this yourself?" "I work for Mrs. Cole," you say. "Redcliffe Street." "How long?" "A year and some months." She turns the bar over again. "My husband thinks I should buy from the French importer." She says French importer, with a tone that is not quite disdain, but is definitely scepticism. "Their soap is whiter. Ours is stronger," you say. "Weight for weight, more actual cleaning capacity. The colour comes from the fat. Whiter fat makes whiter soap, but the function's the same. Sometimes whiter just means more expensive." She looks at you. "You're quite certain of yourself for an apprentice." "I'm certain of the soap," you say. "The soap's been making itself for 11 years. I'm just the one explaining it." She smiles. It's the smile of someone who's been surprised into it. She buys 4 bars. "Tell Mrs. Cole that Eleanor Farrington sends her regards," she says. "We've met, years ago, before the square." She walks away into the market crowd. You watch her go for a moment. Then you wrap the 4 bars in cloth and put the coins in the money pouch and rearrange the display to cover the gap. When Mercy comes back 20 minutes later, you tell her about the transaction, including the name. Mercy stops moving for a moment. "Eleanor Farrington," she says. "She said you'd met." "We did. Her husband's one of the merchant venturers. That's a well-connected household." She looks at you. "What did you say to her?" you tell her. Mercy picks up a bar of soap from the display and looks at it. "Quite certain of yourself for an apprentice," she says, quoting back. "She said that." "And you said?" "I said I was certain of the soap." A pause. "Good," she says. She puts the bar back down. The market continues. The cold air has that particular December sharpness now, the sky darkening earlier than it has any right to. The sounds of the market, voices, cartwheels, the distant bells of something, fold around you in the familiar way. You realise, standing there with your hands cold around the display edge, and your breath making clouds, and your left hand aching in the way it does in cold weather, that you are not unhappy. This is not a dramatic realisation. It doesn't arrive with music. It arrives the way most true things arrive. Quietly, from the side, when you're thinking about something else. You're in a cold market in Bristol in December, selling soap, and you are not unhappy. That's enough to notice. Mercy sometimes sends you to the apothecary at the end of Redcliffe Street in the evenings after the soap house is closed, for the small materials that supplement the main production, certain dried herbs that she adds to the better quality, bars, beeswax for the luxury batch she makes twice a year, the occasional mineral that adjusts the colour or the hardness. These are evening errands, small basket, quick trip. The street is familiar, but the street at 7 in the evening in December is a different street from the one you walk at 7 in the morning. The lanterns are lit outside the larger establishments. A few, not many. The light they throw is more symbolic than practical, creating small circles of amber in the general dark that's thickened since late afternoon. Bristol at night moves differently from Bristol in the day. The daytime city is all purpose and direction. Everyone going somewhere, carrying something, moving in the efficient choreography of commerce. The nighttime city is slower and stranger. People who have no business outside are inside. The people still moving have reasons that are harder to read. You've learned the evening streets well enough by now. The corner where you cross quickly because there's usually a group of young men whose entertainment options and decision-making are in complicated relationship. The alley that's never quite dark enough to be frightening, but never quite light enough to be comfortable. The stretch near the waterfront where the ship's crews come and go and the establishments that serve them exist in an atmosphere of productive ambiguity. None of this is especially dangerous for you. You're small, you're quick, you carry nothing worth stealing, and you smell so strongly of the soap house that the kind of person who might consider bothering you tends to decide that you're probably some kind of industrial hazard and not worth the effort. Tonight you take the longer way back, not because it's safer, but because you want to see the harbour. The harbour at night is extraordinary, not beautiful in the way that painters paint harbours, not romantic, not still. It's industrial and alive even in December at 7 in the evening. Ships at anchor, their riding lights making moving reflections in the dark water. The shouts of the watch, periodic, professional. The creak and knock of rigging, which you've been hearing for a year now, and which has become part of the ambient sound of this city. The way church bells are part of the ambient sound, but somehow more elemental, more tied to the physical fact of what the city is. Bristol exists because of this water, because of the river and then the sea and then the world beyond the sea. The ships in the harbour right now have been places you can't imagine. Or rather, you've tried to imagine them, and your imagination runs out quickly, becomes a kind of generic elsewhere that doesn't really mean anything. The Americas, Africa, the Indies, East and West, the soap you made, the soap Mercy makes and sells and pays tax on and delivers through side entrances. Some of it goes aboard ships. Thomas mentioned this once. Ship chandlers buy large quantities of soft soap for below decks use. The crews wash themselves and their gear with the same stuff that came from the same ash heap and the same tallow delivery on the same Tuesday morning. Your work goes to sea. You never will, probably. But the work does. There's something in that. You're not sure what exactly, but there's something. You stand at the edge of the harbour for a few minutes, long enough for the cold to find its way through your coat, long enough for your feet to communicate their opinions about the quality of the paving stones. Then you turn back toward Redcliffe Street, toward the yard, toward the smell and the warmth and the curing soap in the storeroom and the bed on the floor and tomorrow's 4:30 beginning. Winter passes. This is, in the soap house, a more complex statement than it sounds. Winter has specific implications for the work. The cold affects the curing. Soap cures more slowly in cold, which means the timing of production has to account for this, which means Mercy has been planning since October for what will be ready in February, which will sell in March. In winter, the water for the lye leaching is colder, which slows the process. The fat from the butcher is firmer, which means longer rendering time. The furnace burns more fuel because the heat dissipates faster into the cold air. Everything costs more and takes longer. But winter also means something else. In winter, the demand for soap increases. Not because people wash more in winter, if anything the opposite, but because winter is when the great spring cleaning isn't yet happening, and the household soap stocks are being used up and no one has replaced them, which means March and April see a spike in purchasing that Mercy has been preparing for since January. You understand this now. Not just as information, but as rhythm. The production schedule that Mercy keeps in her head. You've started keeping it in your head too. A parallel record, not quite as complete but growing, is a map of the entire year's worth of chemistry and commerce and timing. By February, you've been here almost 18 months. By February, your left-hand scar is a fact of the landscape of your own palm, pink and smooth and permanent, and you've stopped being surprised by it. By February, you can test the lie by the egg without thinking about it. By February, Mercy lets you complete a batch from start to finish on your own. She's present. She's always present. The soap house demands constant attention, but she's doing other work and she doesn't check on you more than twice, and the batch comes out correctly. You don't tell her what it felt like to finish it and have it be right. She probably knows anyway. Bet turns 13 in the spring, which she announces with the air of someone who's been waiting for this for some time and intends to leverage it. 13, she says at supper, looking at you. That's nearly grown. It is somewhat grown, you allow. I should be doing more of the lye work, she says. You look at Mercy. Mercy is eating her food with the attention she brings to all things that require assessment. You'll do more of the lye work, she says, when you've done more of the ash work and I'm satisfied. Bet opens her mouth. That's not a conversation, Mercy says. That's a statement. Bet closes her mouth. You experience, briefly, the strange sensation of having been on the other side of this and now being on this side. 18 months ago you were Bet. You still are Bet in many ways. But also you are not Bet anymore. You're something else. Something still taking shape. Still being formed by the work and the schedule and the smell and the woman across the table who says the trade teaches you or kills you. Thomas is watching all of this with the expression of a man who has seen this exact scene play out before and finds it quietly satisfying. More ash tomorrow, he says to Bet. Bet sighs the sigh of someone who understands that the universe is not, this week, operating in her favour. Life in the soap house continues. This is the climax that belongs to this story, and no other story. Not a hanging, not a public execution, not a fire, though fire already happened, years before you arrived, and left its mark in the design of the furnace and the oval on Mercy's arm. This is Bristol, and Bristol has a river, and rivers have floods. The Avon floods periodically. Everyone knows this. The lower streets near the harbours and the quays get the worst of it, and they've built their ground floors accordingly with stone rather than wood, with high thresholds, with a kind of architectural acceptance of occasional inundation. Redcliffe Street is not the lowest part of the city, but it's low enough. In March, a wet March, with 2 weeks of heavy rain following a winter that had also been wetter than average, the Avon comes up. Not catastrophically, not the kind of flood that makes history. Just Bristol in March doing what Bristol does periodically, the river expressing its relationship to the sea, the tidal reach pushing further inland than usual, the ground level water table rising, the lower yards and cellars taking on a foot or two of cold brown water. Mercy's yard. You wake at 3 a.m. to the sound of Thomas banging on the storeroom door. Water, he says, in the yard. You're up and moving before you've fully understood what you've heard, because the soap house, the furnace, the materials, your brain constructs the chain of implications before you're through the door. The yard has 4 inches of water in it. The furnace. The furnace is in the soap house, which is built on slightly higher ground than the rest of the yard. The soap house threshold is stone, raised above the yard level, but 4 inches means. You're running through the cold water in your bare feet and you feel it. Not just cold that goes through the feet and into the bones immediately, the shock of it. And you're at the soap house door in 3, steps lifting and pushing inside. The soap house floor is dry, the water hasn't reached the threshold yet. You stand for a moment, breathing. The furnace is burning, low, banked, the night configuration, but burning, safe. You go back out into the flooded yard. Mercy is already there, lantern in hand, moving through the water with the absolute calm of someone who has either lived through this before or has decided that calm is the only efficient option. She looks at the water level, looks at the direction it's coming from, the low corner of the yard near the gate, and looks at the ash heap. The ash heap. You look at it at the same time she does. Wet ash is not a catastrophe exactly, but wet ash loses a significant portion of its alkaline content. Wet ash that's been heavily soaked may need to be replaced almost entirely, and the ash heap represents weeks of collection, weeks of leaching runs, the raw material of the next several batches. Sacking, Mercy says. Thomas is already moving toward the storage shed. You follow. The sacking, heavy burlap bags used for moving ash, used for a dozen things, is kept in the storage shed, which is also above the flood level. You grab armfuls of it. You wade back through the yard water. Now 5 inches you notice it's rising, and you begin covering the ash heap. It's not a sophisticated solution. It's the only available solution. You throw the sacking over the heap as fast as you can move it. You weigh the edges down with the stones that live in the yard. For exactly this kind of purpose, you create the best barrier you can between the ash and the rising water. Bet appears in the yard in her nightclothes with an expression that for once has moved past surprise to something more useful. She looks frightened, which is appropriate, but she's also moving. Barrels, Mercy says. Bet turns and goes to the storage shed. The barrels, the leaching barrels, the ones not currently in use, need to be moved off the yard floor. Not because they'd flood, they're sealed and solid, but because they're wood and sitting in water for hours will warp them. This is the kind of problem solving that happens in a flooded yard at 3 a.m. in March. Not dramatic heroism, just the specific, physical, urgent task of protecting what needs protecting in the order of its importance. You are knee-deep in cold water. Your feet have gone past cold into something that is the absence of feeling. Your hands are working automatically, faster than they've ever worked, and the training, 18 months of training, is all there, all present, telling you exactly what needs doing and in what order. The ash heap is covered. The barrels are moved. The materials that can be moved off the ground are moved. The furnace continues to burn in the soap house above the waterline, ignorant and steady. By 5 in the morning, the water level has stopped rising. By 7, it has dropped 2 inches. By noon, the yard has 3 inches of cold mud where the water was, and you and Bet are shoveling it out with the tools designed for the ash heap, and the smell of wet Bristol in March is something that you will carry with you for a long time. The ash heap, when you check it, has taken some water through the edges of the sacking. Mercy digs into it with a stick, examines what the stick brings out, smells it, looks at the colour. "Top third," she says. "Maybe half. We'll leach it separately and test carefully. The bottom? The bottom's probably fine. The sacking held on the edges where it mattered." She stands up from her crouch. Her skirt is still damp from the night. There are lines of tiredness around her eyes that you haven't seen before, or maybe you have seen them before and are only now able to read them. 3 days, she says, before we can run the next batch. 3 days of drying out, of assessing the damage, of acquiring what was damaged or lost. The next market delivery, I'll send word, she says. She looks at the yard. The mud, the dark patches of wet on the storage shed walls, the displaced barrels. "Well," she says, "just that. Well." And then she goes into the soap house to check the furnace. You clean the yard for 3 days. This is not metaphorical. The mud that came in with the flood water is not just mud. It's Bristol River mud, which has been marinating in the contributions of a working harbour city for several centuries and has a quality of productive filthiness that is impressive even by the general standards of this yard. Bet, who has the youngest back and the least complicated relationship with shovelling, does the bulk of it. You and Thomas do the restoration work, checking the structural integrity of the ash heap, replacing the sacking, running the test batches to assess the lye quality from the potentially damaged ash. The results are not as bad as feared. The bottom third of the ash heap, protected by the density of the ash above it, and the sacking you threw over it in time is fine. Its lye, when you test it, is strong and correct. The top third is weak. You run it through twice, which means the leaching time doubled, and the result is marginal. Mercy looks at the marginal lye the way she looks at most problems, as a fact to be managed. "Soft soap," she says. "The soft soap doesn't need the strength. Run it with the soft." And the damaged ash becomes part of the next batch of laundry soap, and the laundry soap sells at the Thursday market, and the customers who buy it do not know that it was made with ash that very nearly lost its potency in a flood, and that 4 people stood in cold water at 3 in the morning to ensure that it exists at all. This is how things work. This is what the work costs. The customers wash their laundry. The soap does its job. There is a moment in late spring, late March, maybe early April, when you climb to the top of St. Mary Redcliffe's church. Not to the very top. You're not climbing the spire for no reason, but the tower has an accessible level part-way up, reached by a door that's supposed to be locked, but has a lock that has not functioned correctly since approximately the reign of someone Tudor, and which Bet, in her 3 months, had already discovered and noted as information of potential value. She takes you there on a Sunday afternoon, when the shop is closed and the batch is curing, and Mercy has gone to visit her sister. The view! You've seen Bristol from the ground, obviously. You've walked most of it in the past year and a half. You know the streets with the intimacy of daily use, the way you know the inside of the soap house, not as a map, but as a felt territory, a knowledge in the feet and the legs. From here, you see it differently. The river, the Avon curving through the city, brown and alive, reflecting the early spring clouds, the harbour and the ships, more ships than you can count, their masts making a forest above the waterfront roof lines, the city spreading out from the water in all directions, rooftops and chimneys and the grey haze of coal smoke that sits over it all, that is, at this time of year, thinner than winter but still present, a sign of the furnaces and the fires and the constant burning that keeps the whole operation running. You can see Redcliffe Street from here, not the individual buildings with any certainty, but the general area, the church below you throwing a long shadow, the streets you know by feel now spreading out around it. Somewhere in that grid of rooftops and chimneys is Mercy's yard, the ash heap, the leaching barrel, the heavy copper cauldron sitting above its furnace, Thomas at his slow, steady work, Bet learning the things you were learning a year ago, the smell that comes with the steam when the batch is hot, your work, invisible, essential, permanent in the way that invisible essential things are permanent, not in records or portraits or history books, but in the world, in the physical fact of the city's cleanliness, in the households that buy soap without thinking about it, and the merchant who will wash his hands this evening with a bar that started in Mercy's yard on a Tuesday morning with cold fat and ash lye, and a girl with a wooden paddle. It all comes down to this. The world the merchants built on trade and ships and things they prefer not to discuss too explicitly. It requires, at its base, a functioning infrastructure of the invisible. The laundresses and the soap makers and the women who carry water and the men who move the ash. The people who keep clean the spaces where the important things supposedly happen. You are one of them. You will probably always be one of them. Bet is looking at you from the side of her eye, the way she does when she's thinking something she hasn't decided whether to say. "What?" you say. "You look like you're about to make a speech," she says. "I'm not." "Good. It's cold up here." She pulls her shawl tighter. Below. You. Bristol moves in the complicated, purposeful, impossible to summarize way that cities move. The ships creak. The bells mark the hour. The smoke rises from 1,000 fires. You take one more look. Then you follow Bet back down the stairs. You've been here 2 years now, or close enough. 2 years. The anniversary isn't marked. There's no ceremony. The soap house doesn't care about anniversaries. But Mercy notices. She has a way of noticing things without acknowledging them directly, which you've come to understand as its own form of attention. One evening in what must be the spring of your 2nd year, a still evening, unusual for Bristol, where the wind off the water is almost always present. You are both in the back room doing inventory in comfortable silence, and Mercy sets down the bar she's examining and says, with no particular preamble, "My husband could test the lie by smell alone." You look at her. "He'd been doing it 30 years, she says. "Just the smell, no egg, no float test. He'd know." "Could you—" "I could," she says. "By the time he died, I could." She picks up another bar. "Not at first. He showed me the egg test first, same as I showed you." She looks at the bar. "He showed me everything in the right order," she says. "Safety first, then efficacy, then refinement. You don't start with refinement. You start with not killing yourself." "Yes," you say. "You've done well," she says, in the same tone she might use to say the weather is acceptable. "You're careful. You're reliable. You think before you do the difficult things, and you do the simple things without needing to think. You don't know what to say." "The burn," she says, "was careless." "I know." "But the water barrel," she says, "that was automatic. That's what I need to see. Not the absence of mistakes, the correct response to mistakes." She puts the bar back on the shelf. 2 more years, she says. Then you'll know the work completely. Not perfectly. You never know it perfectly, but completely. She picks up the lantern. Go to sleep, she says. Batch starts early tomorrow. She goes upstairs. You sit in the storeroom with the rows of curing soap above your head and the smell that has become, over 2 years, simply the smell of your life. 2 more years, then you'll know it completely. You can live with that. You blow out the candle, the evenings in the yard when the work is done. This is something you've learned to value in the way that you value things you didn't expect to value, quietly, without ceremony, as a fact of your existence. The soap house in the evening, when the furnace is banked and the batch is set and the day's transactions are recorded in the ledger, has a quality that's entirely different from the soap house in the working day. The heat from the furnace persists. The room is warm in a way it isn't always, a residual warmth that the stone holds from hours of burning. The smell is the same, but somehow softer in the evening, less aggressive, more just present. You sit on the bench by the soap house door sometimes when the weather permits, and watch the yard go dark. The light in the yard in the evening is the light of candles in the house windows, the residual glow of the furnace through the door gap, and the sky, which in spring and summer is still pale at 6 or 7, giving the yard a greyish half-light that is neither quite day nor night. Thomas passes through on his way to wherever Thomas goes in the evenings, which you've never inquired about because it seems like private geography and he hasn't offered to share it. Bet in the evenings reads. She can read. Her mother taught her, unusual for where she comes from, something she's oddly unself-conscious about. And she's borrowed 3 books in the time you've known her, none of which you've asked her about because books are her thing, and soap making is your thing, and there's room for both. Mercy in the evenings does the accounts. You can hear the scratch of her pen through the wall of the back room, the occasional pause, the quiet sound of figures being checked. You think about the 2 years you've been here, the year in Compton Bassett before you came, the village, the fields, your mother's kitchen with its smaller and more familiar smells, the schoolmaster who wrote the letter, the journey to Bristol on the carrier's cart sitting on top of someone's furniture wrapped in sacking, watching the countryside become the outskirts of a city with a sense of vertigo that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite excitement, the first week, the first smell, Mercy looking at you for 30 seconds and deciding something, the first lie test, the egg sitting wrong, the adjustment, the try again, the paddle, the figure of 8, the resistance changing as the mixture thickened, Thomas's missing finger end, Mercy's arm, the flood in March, the cold water at 3 a.m, the market and the woman in the blue coat, the delivery to Queen Square through the side entrance, the conversation with Mrs. Alcott, the burn, the water barrel, the pink oval on your left hand, all of it sits in you now, organised differently from how it arrived. Not as a series of events, but as a structure. The structure of a trade, a life in a trade, the way it shapes the body and the habits and the particular kind of attention you bring to work and to everything else. The city outside is doing its evening thing. The bells mark the hour. St. Mary's, 3 streets away, always the clearest. Voices in the street, quieter than the daytime voices but present. The harbour sounds, the water sounds, the creak and rock of things that float. Bristol, your city now. Not the city you came from, but yours nonetheless. You've earned that at least. You've earned a lot of things over 2 years, most of them not describable and all of them permanent. The storeroom at night, The pallet on the floor, the blanket, the familiar dimensions of the room, the smell, which is so constant that you only consciously notice it when you've been away for a few hours and come back. The way you might notice the particular quiet of a room you've been in so long the quiet has become invisible. These soap bars above you on the shelves, pale yellow-brown in the dark, solidly themselves, curing toward the final quality that will determine everything about how they're received at market. Patient objects, objects that don't hurry, objects that take the time they take, and that's all there is to it. You lie down. Your body catalogues the day's work with the practiced efficiency of a body that has been doing this for 2 years. The shoulders, which have learned to carry their complaints without much protest anymore. The back, which has developed opinions about the paddle work that it delivers in the evenings when the work is over. The left hand, which in cold or dampness sends a brief reminder of March, of the burn, of cold water and fast response. All of it present, all of it evidence of something. Outside, Bristol continues its night. The harbour watch calls the hour. The taverns on the near streets push light and noise, and the smell of wood smoke and ale out their doors and into the dark. Somewhere on the water, a ship's lantern makes a moving point of light as the tide turns. In a house on Queen Square, perhaps, a housekeeper moves through the rooms, checking the locks, and in the household's larder there are bars of soap in a cloth-wrapped bundle that came from this yard last week. That smell of ash and tallow and the honest labour of this kind of work. In a ship currently at anchor in the harbour, below decks, in a storage locker with a quarter cask of soft soap from a Bristol supplier. Not necessarily from here, but possibly from here. A sailor will wake at whatever hour sailors wake and begin the small daily maintenance of a body that lives in a harsh environment and has learned, practically, the value of clean. The soap moves in the world. You are, have been, and will continue to be the person who makes it move. You close your eyes. There are 2 more years, Mercy said. 2 more years until you know it completely. 4 years in Bristol. 4 years of this smell, this work, this furnace, this cauldron. 4 years of markets and deliveries and ash and lie and the particular physical education that only comes from doing difficult things with your hands until they become second nature. And then you'll know it. And knowing it completely will mean something, even if it never means anything visible, even if you remain invisible in the way that this work is always invisible. You'll know what you know, and what you know will be real and true and substantial in the way that the soap bars above you are real, the way the furnace is real, the way the oval scar on Mercy's arm is real, not documented, not displayed, but absolutely and permanently true. The sounds of the city are softer now. Or maybe you are softer. Maybe. The drift towards sleep is the drift away from the hard edge of waking and into something more yielding. The boundary between the sounds and your own breathing becomes less certain. The soap house is quiet. The furnace breathes. The city breathes. You breathe. This is the work that kept the world clean. This is what it cost. The burn and the flood and the 4:30 mornings and the cold water and the ash in the lungs and the smell that preceded you everywhere by 4 feet. This is who paid it. Women mostly. 14-year-olds from Wiltshire. 12-year-olds from Gloucester. Widows who had rebuilt everything after losing everything. Men like Thomas, who worked steadily and quietly in an industry that nobody celebrated. The world was clean because of them, is clean because of them. Centuries will pass. The soap making will move into factories, then into massive industrial operations, then into multinational companies with laboratories and marketing departments and celebrity endorsements and a dozen different fragrances and moisturizing properties and things that a woman boiling ash lye in a Bristol yard in 1751 would recognize as soap and nothing else about. The names will change, the scale will change, the chemistry will be understood in ways that the egg test never required. But someone will still make it, and someone will still carry it, and someone's hands will still bear the evidence of the work. Some things don't change. The need for clean doesn't change. The fact that someone has to make it clean doesn't change. The blanket is warmer now than it was when you lay down. Your body has done its work on the cold. Your eyes are closed. The last thing you hear might be the furnace, the low, patient breathing of it through the wall, the thing that never fully sleeps, or the bells. St. Mary Redcliffe, 3 streets away, marking an hour you're too close to sleep to count, or nothing. Nothing at all except the general murmur of a city that contains 500,000 lives and all their work and all their rest and all their dreaming. Let it come. Let the work be done and be enough. Let the smell fade into something that is simply the smell of where you are, where you have been, where you belong. Let the paddle be still. Let the batch set. Let the soap cure in the dark above you, patient and real, and exactly what it is. You've earned this rest. The soap will be there tomorrow. So will the work. So will you. Good night.